what a load. Everybody knows that all the nightmares I have about Oddity Archive all pertain to editing. So there. Uh, anyway, Ben here from where else? The archive, and indeed who else. And it must be that magic time of year again, because here I go just lazily dusting off the previous year's Halloween special for a commentary. And this is the 36th regular episode of Archive, and this is only the first half of it, if you will, Italian Dance Party. And this episode is probably the least rated, lowest rated, least viewed Archive episode to date, and I kind of like this one, so I'd like to think this just kind of got lost in the shuffle of everything that was going on at the time. So, lot to say about this one. Let me back up and get started. The previous episode had been on Kitty Disco Records, children's disco records, and that episode was the absolute worst experience I ever had making an Archive episode, at least to date. Knock on wood, hopefully I never have any worse ones. But I spent 5 days trying to transfer just 3 albums, and 2 of the 3 were just in absolutely dire condition, and I spent forever trying to get a clean pass and did not succeed on a lot of it, and then spent forever trying to kind of filter and EQ the really bad ones, because there was more noise than music going on, so I was contending with that too. And then filming that episode, it was one of the first episodes where I made it mostly box segments, and I couldn't have picked a worse one because it was one of those extremely variable, cloudy sort of days. It would be real bright one second, then dark the next, and to the point where I couldn't even make it work lighting-wise, just completely internally. And it was the magic day that I forgot to focus the camera and forgot to hit record a couple of times, and it was the magic day where I was having grounding issues that I had never had before and haven't had since, again, knock on wood. But it was just absolutely terrible. And then I spent all this time getting this episode together that I just admittedly wasn't very enthusiastic about to begin with. And in that period between my finishing it and it coming out on what would have been Blip, word came down from the mountain, from Blip, that they were dropping Archive and that my upload privileges were immediately being suspended. So that kind of felt like the final insult. And so that started me having to transfer everything over to YouTube, and it was just this endless process. And I knew I was going to have to start an alternate kind of fake info sort of YouTube channel for those Blip-only episodes, because they were ones that, I already had the YouTube channel, but some of those episodes were not getting cross-posted to YouTube for a very good reason, and it was called copyright. And so, stuff that used more mainstream sort of stuff that I knew was more than likely going to get me a notice. And indeed, I knew full well because of Mickey Mouse Disco, Kitty Disco was going to get me nailed. So great, here I am having to start this new channel, and well, that episode's a total loss now. And so I'd been kind of plotting what I'd wanted to do for Halloween, because it was kind of getting to be that time, but I was actually plotting something that would be just the polar opposite of the first Halloween episode, which was kind of my own little stab at a kind of indie short film horror sort of deal. And this time I wanted it to be just this warm, fuzzy, friendly, nostalgic sort of thing. And, there might have been a little bit of a scare to it, but it wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be, again, just more of a nostalgic sort of happy sort of thing. But everything that had been happening had just kind of put me in a bad mood. So I was feeling I wanted to do something a little darker, and I wanted to, repetition be damned. I was going to do another horror sort of deal. And getting to Italian Dance Party, I had seen the commercial for it several months earlier, and I fell in love with it the instant I saw it. I thought, this looks like such a completely screwed up album. And I tried for months trying to find a copy of it, be it on eBay, Amazon, Gem, whatever, and with no luck. And then I found it on some mom and pop indie record shop sort of site, and they flaked out on me. And then thankfully another copy turned up somewhere else. but I knew I was probably going to do a mini-sode on it at some point, and so oh God, Ben, your voice. I knew I was going to probably do a mini-sode on it, but, you know, I had just done Kitty Disco. I guess I was feeling kind of masochistic, and it seemed just too perfect. It seemed like, okay, I've just spent all this time with Kitty Disco, and I was not very happy about it, be it in real life or in the episode. And so, of course, what am I going to do? Another disco record, and, you know, it being Halloween and the horse sort of deal, it would be the one that would just push me right over the cliff.
Discussing real topics again.
So finally getting around to the making of this episode proper, the opening sequence with me in bed and having a bunch of nightmares, apparently you can have a bunch of nightmares all at once, or maybe it was just kind of a super nightmare, but either way, you know, how great would it be to have Benny Boy in bed with the camcorder on next to him, just conveniently, magically, having all these nightmares and then waking up and turning on the TV and all. But when I made that, I know I'm going to burst so many people's bubbles here, but I did not actually shoot that at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was right after sundown, and I just went to the clock and hit the hour button a bunch of times, and that's how it magically became 3 a.m. And so when I woke up, supposedly, and turned on the TV, that was a transmission test that I had recorded sometime farther back. So that's how I conveniently had a test pattern going on there. And then coming up here with the next bed sequence, that was shot on the same night. I just went back and dinked around with the clock again. And the movie that's playing on there, and there it is, Nosferatu, F.W. Murnau, 1922. Yeah, 1992, sure. 1922, and I think it's a very effective horror film, and it being Halloween and creepy and all, I intentionally picked the scene where the guy slices his thumb with a knife there, and maybe he really did that. I'm not too sure, but, you know, it seemed like such a good choice, and it seemed to line up what was to come, and it was public domain to boot, so, you know, happy accidents. And so that was all shot on one evening, and then coming up here where I supposedly go on my murderous rampage, that was shot on another night, again, just after dark. It was probably about 9 o'clock or so, if that. And with that, that's the only part of this episode that I really wish I could have gotten to turn out better, because even though I turned the exposure up all the way and turned on the low lux and even tried to brighten it a bit in post-production, it just looked more like a black screen with a bad case of kind of a laser rot sort of thing going on. So that didn't turn out too well. You can only see parts of it kind of sort of clearly. Like here, you can see my arm pulling a knife out of a butcher block. And through a little creative editing, I get to the doorway here. Then I am magically outside. It doesn't really quite work that way. But you can see me in a few seconds here crossing through the door. But that's really about all you can see. And knowing that I was going to have to make it work more from an audio standpoint than anything else, that's why I'm really going through the grass and kind of taking more exaggerated steps. And whenever I wanted to supposedly stab someone, I just stomped my foot in the grass and would rub my shoe along the ground to try and make it seem like, I just hit somebody and then the person fell. And then as for the sound, yes, I really was carrying a knife in one hand and carrying the camcorder in the other. So that was a bit of an issue. Let me talk about that for a second. Yes, because I was really prowling around in this yard with a butcher knife in one hand and a camcorder in the other, and you can hear a car go by at one point, and I actually kind of had to try and duck behind a tree because I just wanted to get this made. I wasn't going out to try and find anybody. So that was memorable. And as for my stabbing people, that was kind of a hybrid sound effect I built up. So it's the sound of a head of, I believe, cabbage getting stabbed, and running my hand through some cooked pasta for that kind of squishy sound, and some samples of people just breathing, or kind of gasping for air. And so that's how that kind of happened. And another little fear I had because of the blip thing, and it had been very much a topic in archive land, that I was afraid that maybe it would be misconstrued as me stabbing a bunch of blip execs, but it wasn't intended to be that way. And this little bit here, this shows you just how anal a record collector I am, because when I pull out the record and you see my supposedly blood-stained hands, which was actually just slightly watered-down ketchup, it's conveniently only on the backs of my hands, because I didn't want any of that awful ketchup getting on my precious copy of Italian Dance Party. So, yeah, you can see if you look at the sides of my fingers, yeah, I could have done that a little better, I guess. Anyway, we're coming to the end here, but I have one more point I want to discuss, and that after going through all this stuff with Blip and the previous disco album episode, trying to find this record, I actually got nailed for copyright by YouTube for the rendition of the Tarantella on here, and so that's why I had to split the episode into two, because I could just not win that claim, and I wanted to be able to recoup something, so I split it. And so the riffs that I did afterwards were I could actually, really fully claim that as my own. But, stuff happens, you move on. And indeed, episode's long over, so I better shut up now. Ben here from the archive, signing off, and I'll see you again soon.